If you want to feel more connected to humanity and a little less alone, listen to Beautiful Anonymous. Each week, I take a phone call from one random anonymous human being. There's over 400 episodes in our back catalog. You get to feel connected to all these different people all over the world. Recent episodes include one where a lady survived a murder attempt by her own son. But then the week before that, we just talked about Star Trek. It can be anything. It's unpredictable. It's raw. It's real. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
The whole Jon Benet case is unthinkable. But today, we're going to answer the question, who really killed Jon Benet Ramsey? This and more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster, what some people are they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charlie Crimebuster, CharlieCrimebuster.com, and PeacemakerNetwork.com are copyrights owned by Charlie Crimebuster. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining with us in this Unthinkable series. We've been sharing some unthinkable things about true crime investigations. And for the past few episodes, we've been thinking about the unthinkable regarding the Jon Benet Ramsey case. Love for you to get caught up on those episodes. We'll tell you how in just a moment. But first, let me take a moment to welcome you to the program. If you're a new listener, we'd like to urge you to reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's not just for new listeners. Even seasoned listeners are invited to reach out with a shout out. People sometimes will ask us questions. They will make suggestions about other episodes. And some will even lodge some objections. They object to what I say. And we always tell you, go right ahead. It is a safe space. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. There are those who've said they'd like to help support the program. Well, go to PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. You can read all about those brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. We are talking again and again about those very special heroes out there. Law enforcement, first responders, and the brave men and women of our military. Read all about that at PeacemakerNetwork.com. And if you'd like to get caught up on these other cases that we've already dropped, go to CharlieCrimebuster.com. There you can find a whole bunch of episodes. James Buckland likes to call it binge-casting, where you just binge on these podcasts. Well, you're welcome to do so. That's at CharlieCrimebuster.com. All those links, we'll put it right there in the show notes, so you can just click. Well, let's get right back into our focus. We're talking about the Jon Benet Ramsey case. And maybe, and by the way, today I'm going to tell you who I believe really killed Jon Benet Ramsey. I'm going to tell you who I believe killed her. But before we get into the suspects, let me say that some of you, you may have been thinking like I do sometimes, when I wonder why there are some true crime cases that gets the attention of the nation and the world, while others do not. For instance, in the first part of this case, it was immediately handled like a kidnapping, but surely Jon Benet wasn't the only person kidnapped in 1996. In fact, my friend, sadly, thousands of children are abducted annually in this world and country. You see, my friend, it's really hard to gather the real statistics because they are commingled into other statistics. And a portion of them, to be honest with you, are custodial kidnappings. But there are still thousands of people, of young children who are kidnapped, unfortunately. But why did this one get such national attention? Well, there are those who will tell you it's because it was a young white child, rather than a child of color. There are others who will tell you because it was her, the way she was interacting in these beauty pageants for children. It became really sensational news, and the tabloids gobbled it all up. And there were, of course, the sexual part of this where they believe now that she was sexually abused during her murder. Well, the point is that some of these will rise to national and world attentions, and some do not. And this one certainly did back in 1996. But before I tell you who I think really killed Jon Benet, let me take just a moment and tell you about something else that happened in 1996 involving kidnapping. You see, there was one kidnapping that began at the very first of the year, and it too, just like Jon Benet, it impacted the world. And that was when 9-year-old Amber Hagerman, she was abducted in January of 1996. But you see, at that time, there was no easy way for law enforcement to quickly alert the public about child abductions. However, that all changed when one ordinary citizen saddened about Amber's story. That citizen stepped up and contacted her local Dallas-Fort Worth radio station in Texas. Diana Simmons knew that if the public heard about a child abduction, they would want to help. We would all think that, right? And so she came up with the idea to have the local radio stations alert the public when a child abduction occurred in their community, so they could then send in tips to law enforcement. And so you get now where this is coming from, don't you? And where it's going to, more importantly. By October of 1996, the first Amber, America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response Alert Plan, named in honor of Amber Hagerman, well, it was launched in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Now, after 25 years plus later, there is a reported 1,074 abducted children all around the country and the world who have been safely recovered as a result of Amber Alerts. You see, the Amber Alert was wildly successful. And of course, it involved the public and their own involvement and concern for children in the community. Mike Simmons, senior chief at the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office in Texas, he was, by the way, one of those who helped develop the first Amber Alert plan. And he says, quote, as someone who worked on the Amber Hagerman investigation from the very beginning, who was there when we recovered her body, who dealt with it on a daily basis, well, he just went on to say he was very grateful that that plan is still in effect, and it has been so successful. Now, originally, these Amber Alerts, they were only going to be broadcast on the radio. They were trying to reach people who were out of their house, out in the vehicles, driving around, turning to local radio stations. He went on to say we could utilize their eyes out in the community to help us spot something unusual, then we could follow up on it. But today it's come a long way, hasn't it, since it was first created in 1996. Today, those alerts are broadcast in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and 27 countries by televisions, road signs, hotel chains, internet service providers, apps, and of course, our wireless phones. So now, I guess, obviously, you want to know, since this started in 1996, was there an Amber Alert issued for Jon Benet Ramsey? Well, sadly, in our research, we found there was no Amber Alert issued. Now, that could be for a couple reasons. First, it was still somewhat new to law enforcement. And also, there were usually in these alerts a lot more information available to broadcast. Description of clothes, more importantly, who may have done it, and maybe even a description of the vehicle. Perhaps there would have been one if this had indeed really been a kidnapping. But we know that it was not a real kidnapping. We know now that it was really a cold-blooded murder rather than a kidnapping. But some interesting things to think about regarding the Amber Alert. Hopefully your question was answered about the Amber Alert, about how it was not used with Jon Benet Ramsey, even though it started in 1996. But it is still a wonderful tool. Please take time to pay attention to those alerts. It could save lives. Well, speaking of questions, the real question is, who killed Jon Benet Ramsey? And I'm going to give you my answer to that in just a moment. But now it is time for us to kind of lighten the load with what we call weekly Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Our Crazy Crook story today, well, it started out as an escape by an SUV. Ended up in a failed escape by, listen, now get this, a rowboat. That's right. That's according to police in Jefferson County, Washington. They had talked about and described a blotch burglary. It did end up in 2 arrests, but also a sunken getaway vessel. And of course, mynorthwest.com and KIRO7 tells all about this incident that took place on a Tuesday morning when a homeowner called 911, said that there was a theft of about $11,000 worth of gold and jewelry, all from a storage container. He said that the perps, they were a man and woman dressed in black. They'd left the scene in an SUV with, get this, covered license plates. They were smart enough to cover the license plate, right? Well, hold on. They get crazy as it goes along. The homeowner he threw some firewood at their vehicle trying to get them to stop. Thinks that he shattered a window, but the suspects did get away. But all the deputies there in Kitsap County, they eventually found a flipped-over SUV that matched that example crashed near Port Gamble. Then they fled on foot. But these deputies, they're right on top of it. They sent a drone up in the air, track it down. Soon they spotted them, now get this, in a reported stolen rowboat on Port Campbell Bay, trying to roll away using makeshift paddles, including a piece of plywood. You know what happened next, right? That rowboat, it began to flood with water, and it forced the suspects to have to swim back to land. And guess who was there waiting? Yep, the popo. Arrested them on the spot. Suspects were not injured, despite the fact that it was very cold, the temperature of the water there. And they were booked into the Jefferson County judge. That SUV, they impounded it. And it's not yet clear whether the homeowner's jewelry was recovered or not. Could be floating down there in the bottom of the water. We don't know. But anyhow, these crazy crooks who tried to get away from Popo, the police, in a rowboat that was sinking, they are indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crooks of the Week. All right, now we're going to talk about suspects in this case with a disclaimer that all these are reported suspects and should all be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. James, appreciate me reminding you of that. Well, we're going to begin now with the ones that appears to be what the local law enforcement dialed down on. And if you've been listening, you know what that's all about. First of all, Patsy herself. Patsy Ramsey, Jon Benet's mother. You see, many seasoned investigators, not only myself, but many seasoned investigators agree with my investigation that the Boulder police latched down on the Ramseys as their main suspect. Even though they may have taken a quick look at others, they may have said, okay, let's look at these others, just to say we looked at other people. They really did not zero in really hard on anybody. They still kept the Ramseys as their main target. And as I have said in this investigation, I believe that they did indeed get tunnel vision in this investigation. But some of the reason why Patsy was suspected was that the ransom note was written on a notepad that Patsy was using. Combine that with the fact that the garrote that was used to kill her, it was from one of Patsy's paintbrushes. This even fed into investigator Stephen Thomas, who was the main detective on the case, who, by the way, was not an experienced homicide detective, rather a narcotics investigator. Remember, I compared him to Lou Smith, who the DA brought in? Lou Smith had over 150 homicides, but Stephen Thomas had 0. But he did come up with a theory. His theory was that Patsy got angry that Jon Benet wetted the bed, perhaps lashed out in anger at Jon Benet, not meaning to kill her, but then staged the crime to cover up her doings. A theory that he put into a book to make money from. Incidentally, when he was under oath, in a civil suit that he lost, he was decimated by the Ramsey's attorneys. His argument that she was killed and then the scene staged, well, that was certainly proven untrue by the medical examiner's report that clearly stated she was alive when she was tortured with that garrote. Not even Thomas, in his speculation, void of evidence, was prepared to go there that Patsy tortured and sexually abused her own child. And as we stated last week, when you talk about the note that was written, experts who knew their stuff, over 4 of them, along with top 2 Secret Service investigators, they all testified and stated that Patsy did not write the ransom letter. But next we have the other suspect, who is again a part of the family, and that's Jon Ramsey himself. I told you last week of Detective Arntz, who solved the case in her own mind in just a matter of a few hours, sitting with the family, waiting for the ransom call. She certainly solved the case in her own mind, without any evidence whatsoever. She said John did the deed, just by the look of a frightened father who had just found his daughter dead on the cold basement floor. Unbelievable to me. Those in this camp that think that John was a sexual predator and that he sexually abused Jon Benet. Again, a void of any evidence whatsoever. The most outrageous claim of this particular suspect came in a so-called psychologist who got her moment in fame on a national TV show where she took, the film of Jon Benet in her beauty pageants while she was performing with a small saxophone. She had the audacity to share that because she was using a saxophone and moving up and down like so many who play the saxophone, she said she was actually masturbating with it. Are you kidding me? Are you insane? This is one of the most ridiculous claims of all, indicating that she must have been sexually abused. This claim that Jon Ramsey sexually abused Jon Benet, it was shut down by medical response. One from her own doctor, who saw her often, stated that there was absolutely none, no signs that Jon Benet was sexually abused. No sign that she was emotionally abused. No signs that she was physically abused by anyone prior to her murder on that cold December night into the morning. Add to this that there was real evidence that an outside intruder came into that house. This should clear the parents. In fact, the district attorney even cleared the Ramseys along with an apology in light of the fact that DNA was found under her fingernails in her panties, and that DNA did not match anyone in the Ramseys household. So the media was out for sensationalism, trying to up the other. The tabloids came forward with yet another crazy theory that Burke, the 9-year-old son, can't you leave this family alone to grieve their daughter, I asked? No. Now it was Burke, and this was embellished on another TV program where they played to the audience, came up with a theory. That Jon Benet must have eaten a pineapple slice that belonged to Burke. He got mad, bashed her head in with a bat. Parents staged the scene to make it look like a murder. Really? Come on, folks. No evidence whatsoever. You could just easily blame this on outer space aliens coming in and murdering her and sexually abusing her. If you're just going to make stuff up without evidence, why not add that to it? Burke was cleared by the district attorney. Investigators say now that he was never really a suspect. In a moment, we're going to share with you more suspects. But first, let me take just a moment to invite you to cross over to get the best out of these episodes. On a weekly basis, after we drop an episode, we then attempt to drop during the week a YouTube episode, where then James Buckland interviews me about the previous podcast episode that we just dropped. That way it allows us more time to discuss special interests regarding the past episode. In order to get there, just go to YouTube, slash it, Charlie Crownbuster, tag it, Charlie Crownbuster, and subscribe so you get that episode. Our podcast is on numerous platforms, but it's also presented in YouTube as well. If you've not yet subscribed, let me encourage you to please do so. You will not regret it. Well, now to more suspects. Now, these that are coming now are those that would get into the intruder part of this. One of the first ones was a guy by the name of Gary Olive. He was 32 years of age. He was a known sex offender in Boulder, Colorado, when Jon Benet was found strangled to death in what looked like a potential sexual assault. There was even a droplet of blood on her underwear. So this convicted pedophile had been living in the area on and off when police allegedly found, now get this, a cutout of Jon Benet Ramsey in his backpack after he was apprehended on drug charges in 2000. He was soon released, but suspicions did remain. And the Ramsey had a private investigator, Ollie Gray. He referred to Olive's ties to Jon Benet as a bombshell arrest. And in the case, he lambasted the Boulder PD for failing to consider him a more credible suspect. Soon after that, Gary's high school friend, Mr. Vale, stepped forward. Another allegation. Vale claimed that not long after the murder, distraught, Gary had called him on the phone, confessed to his longtime pal to have hurt a little girl. He said, quote, "I hurt a little girl." He also revealed to another magazine that he was particularly unsettled about how the knots used to fashion the garrote that strangled Jon Benet was similar to those in an incident where Gary attempted to choke his mother with a telephone cord. He said, "My blood ran cold when I read that." There's also rumored that Gary had possible connections to a theory that links the marks found on Jon Benet's body to a stun gun. We told you about that. Gary actually had one with him at the time of his arrest. But he was cleared by DNA testing. Well, next we have what we call the Santa Claus suspect. You see, this was Bill Reynolds. He was a friend of the Ramsey who dressed up as Santa Claus. That was the week before her murder. He entertained neighborhood children on a Patsy's famous Christmas gathering. Now, I guess an older man dressed as Santa makes a pretty good perk. Well, in a sexualized child murder, that is. And probably the news was all over this. It is now pretty well considered that the possibility that McReynolds, who now has been deceased, that he had anything to do with Jon Benet's death, most investigators will tell you that is highly, highly unlikely. A lot of buzz about it. Even he wanted to share some glitter with little Jon Benet and said that when he died, he wanted that glitter to be buried with him. But really, no evidence at all to convict this friendly old man. But there was another potential suspect, Michael Heathcloth. He worked at a nearby auto salvage yard. He was referred to by many people as a hellraiser. And he had a property dispute involving the Ramseys. And some people say, maybe that he had some sort of motivation for revenge on the family, wanted to kidnap her. But when he caught wind that he might be a suspect in the case, there was one other thing about this guy that kind of got people's attention. There was a boot print found near the Ramsey home. That boot print matched in size his own boots. And so some people thought that he was a real suspect. But he decided to kill himself. And his death occurred, 2 days after a press conference announced that Boulder DA was zeroing in on a new suspect. But he too was cleared by both DNA and his own death. Then I guess was the most sensational one, was one that you can probably remember now. And that was that in 2006, there was a former school teacher, John Mark Carr, actually confessed. He had confessed to a reporter who had taped him through a series of recordings that he had indeed he had been involved in the strangulation of Jon Benet. He actually talked about it in a graphic sexual detail. In fact, the reporter thought that he had details that nobody else knew. He was arrested in Thailand, where he had been living on the lam. News media was all over this, bringing him here to the United States to face other charges that he was running from. Pornography charges, that was child pornography charges. He was actually brought himself into the mess because he had reached out, not to a reporter, but actually to a Colorado Boulder professor. And he had begun to talk about this. You can see a documentary all about this. But, surprise, 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 he too was ultimately cleared after his DNA failed to match the profile that was already known about her. So, my friend, there are several suspects, but who do I think? Who do I think really killed Jon Benet? Well, believe it or not, I do have somebody in mind. And in order to tell you about it, I have to tell you about another person who was assaulted 9 months later after Jon Benet's death. The U.S. Sun talked about this in an article, and they referred to her by, a made-up name as Amy. Amy had woke up early hours in September 14, 1997, and she found a man dressed in all black standing at her bedside with his hand over her mouth. The attacker even addressed her by her real name, threatened, now listen to this, to knock her out if she screamed. And for several horrifying minutes, she was sexually assaulted by this unidentified assailant. Now, Amy's family believes that that man had intended to abduct her, but that plan was foiled. When the girl's mom, she woke up, burst into the room, had a can of mace after she had heard the sound of whispering voices from down the hall. And this particular suspect, who ran away at that time, not only stands out to me, but it stands out to Jon Ramsey himself. And that is this masked intruder who snuck inside a home of a 12-year-old girl in Boulder, Colorado, 12 months after Jon Benet's murder. That suspect raped the girl and ran away when the child's mother scared him off. Jon Benet's father says these words. He says that to me, he said, it could have easily been the same person that killed my daughter. When talking to an interview, he expressed shock when he learned that the unidentified 12-year-old girl who had purportedly been raped in the middle of the night 2 miles, get this, 2 miles from where the Ramseys lived, and hang on to it, she too went to the same dance studio as Jon Benet. You see, it was the same method of operation. The killer was in the house when we came home, waited till we went to sleep. The same thing happened with this 12-year-old girl. They came home. They set the burglar alarm. The killer was already in the house. Very similar method. And yet, according to Jon Ramsey, the police blew it off. It was, he said, the same investigator as in our case, and they blew it off. But even the father of this little girl, who was 12 years old, who was raped, he said on a scale of 1 to 10, I rate the police -5. He said and then he said it was just boneheaded ignorance. But yes, even the father of this 12-year-old girl believes that there's a very strong possibility it was the same person. Well, for me, my friend, I agree with these two fathers, with Jon Ramsey and the father of this girl that we call Amy, who was raped 9 months later in the same manner, the same method, coming into the home, hiding there till the family came home. That same one, I believe, my friend, was the one who killed Jon Benet Ramsey. And I believe that if DNA, which we are hoping will eventually lead to the arrest of Jon Benet's killer, if DNA identifies that person, I believe it will be the same person that would have killed Amy that night had her mother not heard something and fought him like a mama bear on that night. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope that DNA will find this assailant. It is unthinkable, truly, that the police blew this one off and did not work more diligently to connect the two. Someone saw both of them at that same dance studio, if this is the case. And this crime, I believe, could have been solved. And we pray that it will. Well, till this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster. I've told you who I think killed Jon Benet Ramsey, the same guy that attacked that little girl 9 months later. Till this time next time, let me remind you, be safe, be alert, yes, for the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.